This wasn't supposed to happen. In 1985, Hollywood poured millions into films that looked unstoppable and watched them collapse almost overnight. How do major studios lose fortunes on movies that seemed guaranteed to succeed? Behind the posters and premieres were production disasters, miscalculations, and decisions that quietly destroyed careers. Tonight, we uncover 13 catastrophic failures, and one of them nearly changed how Hollywood takes risks forever. Red Sonja, 1985. On paper, this looked like a guaranteed success. The sword and sorcery wave was still alive, and Arnold Schwarzenegger's presence alone should have pulled audiences in. But something felt off the moment the film began. The tone lacked the intensity that made Conan films work, and the story never built real stakes. Instead of epic danger, viewers were given flat characters and predictable conflicts. Even the action, which should have carried the film, felt strangely lifeless. Critics quickly pointed out its weak narrative and uneven pacing. Behind the scenes, the studio expected this to expand a fantasy franchise. Instead, it exposed how fragile that genre really was. Audiences were already moving on, and Red Sonja arrived just as interest was fading. What was meant to be a continuation of success quietly became a warning sign. Silverado, 1985. At first glance, Silverado had everything needed for a comeback. A strong ensemble cast, sweeping landscapes, and a classic Western structure designed to revive a fading genre. But the problem wasn't quality. It was timing. By the mid-1980s, audiences had shifted away from traditional Westerns. The appetite for slow-burn frontier stories had been replaced by fast-paced blockbusters and high-concept entertainment. Despite its craftsmanship, Silverado struggled to justify its large budget. It performed modestly, but not enough to recover costs or reignite interest in the genre. For studios, that was the real failure. The film became a quiet casualty of changing tastes. It proved that even well-made movies could collapse if they arrived in the wrong era. Hollywood didn't just lose money here, it lost confidence in Westerns for years to come. Revolution, 1985. This was supposed to be prestige filmmaking at its finest. Starring Al Pacino and set during the American Revolution, the film aimed to deliver historical depth and emotional power. Instead, it became one of the most infamous misfires of the decade. From the beginning, audiences struggled to connect with the story. The pacing felt uneven, and Pacino's performance, particularly his unexpected accent, left viewers confused. Critics were harsh, and word of mouth spread quickly. But the real damage ran deeper. This wasn't just a box office disappointment. It was a career-altering failure. Pacino himself later stepped away from film acting for several years, a rare move for a star of his level. Behind the scenes, production issues and creative disagreements had already weakened the film. By the time it reached theaters, it felt like a project that had lost its direction. Revolution didn't just fail financially. It became a symbol of how even top-tier talent could miscalculate what audiences truly wanted. D.A.R.Y.L. 1985. The concept sounded irresistible. A seemingly ordinary boy with extraordinary abilities, who is secretly a government-created machine. It blended science fiction with emotional storytelling, aiming to capture both families and genre fans. But something never fully connected. The film struggled to balance its identity. Was it a heartfelt story about belonging or a high-tech thriller? The answer was unclear, and audiences felt that confusion. Despite a strong central idea, the execution lacked urgency. The emotional beats didn't hit as deeply as intended, and the sci-fi elements weren't exciting enough to compensate. At the box office, it quietly underperformed. Not a dramatic collapse, but a clear sign that the film failed to find its audience. What makes D.A.R.Y.L. interesting is how close it came to working. In another version, with sharper direction or stronger pacing, it might have succeeded. Instead, it became another example of a film caught between two identities, never fully committing to either. Jagged Edge, 1985. This legal thriller had all the ingredients of a hit. A compelling premise, recognizable stars, and a courtroom mystery designed to keep audiences guessing. but expectations can be dangerous. While Jagged Edge performed decently, it fell short of what the studio had hoped for. The marketing promised a gripping, unforgettable experience. What audiences received felt more restrained and conventional. The tension built slowly, but not always effectively. Some viewers found the pacing uneven, while others felt the story didn't deliver the shocking impact it hinted at. Over time, the film gained appreciation, but its initial performance revealed something important. Audiences were becoming more selective. They didn't just want a good story, they wanted something unforgettable. Jagged Edge wasn't a disaster in isolation, but in the high-stakes environment of 1985, where budgets were rising and competition was intense, not enough could still mean failure. And in Hollywood, falling short of expectations can be just as damaging as a complete collapse. The Legend of Billie Jean, 1985. Fair is fair. That line would later become iconic. But when the film first released, audiences didn't respond the way the studio expected. The story followed a teenage girl who becomes a symbol of rebellion after a small injustice spirals out of control. It had energy, attitude, and a message that felt ahead of its time. But that may have been the problem. The tone sat in an unusual space, part youth drama, part social commentary, part road movie. It didn't fit neatly into a single category, making it difficult to market. At the box office, it struggled. Viewers weren't sure what they were getting, and many chose safer, more familiar films instead. Yet over time, something changed. The film found a new audience, one that connected deeply with its themes of identity and resistance. It slowly transformed into a cult classic. But that later success doesn't erase the reality of its initial failure. In 1985, The Legend of Billie Jean was another reminder that being ahead of your time can come at a cost. And sometimes, that cost is immediate. To Live and Die in L.A., 1985. This was not a safe film. From its opening moments, it made that clear. Directed by William Friedkin, the movie embraced a gritty, almost uncomfortable realism. It showed a version of crime and law enforcement that felt unpredictable and morally uncertain. For some viewers, that was compelling. For others, it was too much. The film refused to follow traditional storytelling rules. Characters made questionable choices. The tone remained tense and unforgiving. And just when audiences thought they understood where the story was going, it shifted. Critics recognized its boldness, but mainstream audiences were less enthusiastic. The film's darkness limited its appeal, and its unconventional structure made it harder to recommend through word of mouth. At the box office, it underperformed. Yet today, it's often praised as one of the most daring crime films of its era. But in 1985, as that boldness came with a price, Hollywood learned a quiet lesson here. Originality can be powerful, but it can also be risky, especially when audiences aren't ready for it. The Bride, 1985. Reimagining a classic story can feel like a guaranteed advantage, but it also creates expectations that are incredibly difficult to satisfy. The Bride attempted to revisit the Frankenstein myth through a more emotional, character-driven approach. With Sting in a leading role, the film positioned itself as something unique, a blend of art-house storytelling and mainstream Gothic drama. On paper, it sounded distinctive, but that balance never fully came together. The tone shifted constantly. At moments, it leaned into serious, almost philosophical drama. Then it moved toward romance, then back into Gothic fantasy. And this inconsistency made it hard for audiences to understand what kind of film they were watching. Critics were divided, and that division quickly affected audience interest. Without strong word of mouth, the film lost momentum almost immediately after release. Financially, it struggled to recover its production costs, becoming another quiet casualty in a year already filled with underperforming films. What makes The Bride so fascinating is its ambition. It wasn't trying to follow a safe formula. It aimed for something more thoughtful, more layered. But in a competitive market, ambition without clarity can work against a film. And in the end, The Bride left behind a lingering question. Was it truly misunderstood? Or simply unable to connect? Enemy Mine, 1985. While few productions in 1985 unraveled as dramatically as Enemy Mine, what began as a bold, ambitious science fiction story soon became a logistical and financial struggle that the filmmakers could not fully control. At its core, the film carried a powerful idea: two enemies, a human pilot and an alien soldier, stranded together on a hostile planet, forced to depend on each other to survive. It was a story about trust, survival, and understanding across boundaries that should have made them enemies forever. But behind the camera, everything was falling apart. Directors were replaced mid-production. The budget continued to climb as delays mounted. Harsh filming conditions added pressure to an already strained project. Each setback left visible marks on the final film. When it finally reached theaters, audiences sensed that imbalance. The pacing felt uneven, and the emotional weight of the story didn't fully connect the way it needed to. The result was immediate. The film struggled at the box office, losing significant money and fading quickly from mainstream attention. Years later, it would be reevaluated as thoughtful and ahead of its time. But in 1985, none of that mattered, because in Hollywood, potential means nothing without results. Year of the Dragon, 1985. When a film combines a high-profile director with a large budget, expectations rise quickly. Year of the Dragon, directed by Michael Cimino, carried that weight from the start. Cimino was already associated with one of Hollywood's most infamous financial disasters, and this project was seen as a chance to prove himself again. Instead, as it reignited controversy. The film's portrayal of Chinatown sparked criticism and debate. Some viewers found it intense and gripping, while others saw it as problematic and divisive. This controversy overshadowed everything else. Even though the film had strong performances and moments of real tension, the negative attention made it difficult to attract a broad audience. At the box office, it failed to perform as expected. The situation highlighted a deeper issue. Hollywood wasn't just dealing with financial risk, it was navigating cultural sensitivity in a changing world. For Cimino, the film reinforced a reputation that studios were already wary of. And for the industry, it became another reminder that controversy can drive attention. But it doesn't always drive ticket sales. Santa Claus, the movie, 1985. This was supposed to be a holiday classic, a film that families would return to year after year. The studio invested heavily, building elaborate sets and crafting a detailed origin story for Santa Claus. The goal was clear: create something timeless, but ambition can be dangerous. The film struggled with tone and structure. It tried to balance magical storytelling with modern elements, but the combination didn't always feel natural. Audiences were expecting something warm and simple. What they received felt more complicated and uneven. Despite the seasonal appeal, the film failed to generate the strong box office returns needed to recover its high budget. Over time, it found a niche audience, but that didn't change its initial impact. Financially, it was a disappointment. What makes this case particularly striking is how confident the studio was. They believed they were creating a guaranteed success. Instead, they discovered how unpredictable audience reactions can be, even for something as universally appealing as A Christmas Story. King Solomon's Mines, 1985. Adventure films were dominating the box office. The massive success of Indiana Jones had created a formula that studios rushed to replicate. Fast-paced action, exotic settings, and treasure-driven storytelling that promised non-stop excitement. King Solomon's Mines was one of those calculated attempts. On the surface, it had everything audiences were supposed to love: sweeping locations, hidden riches, dangerous journeys, and a central adventure built around discovery. It looked like the kind of film that should have worked. But there was a problem hiding beneath that formula. Imitation is not the same as innovation. Instead of building something fresh, the film leaned heavily on familiar tropes. The structure, the character dynamics, even the pacing felt predictable. Rather than delivering tension and surprise, it often felt like a version of something audiences had already seen, only less refined. Critics recognized this immediately, and their response shaped audience perception. Word of mouth lacked urgency, and without that momentum, the film struggled to maintain interest. Financially, it didn't collapse outright, but it failed to reach the level the studio had expected. And in a high-risk environment, falling short of expectations can be just as damaging as a clear failure. The lesson was subtle, but significant. The audiences don't just want repetition, they want evolution. They want the familiar feeling, but with something new layered on top. And when that balance is missing, even the most successful formula can quietly lose its power. Heaven Help Us, 1985. Some failures are loud, explosive, impossible to ignore. Others slip through quietly and reveal far more about the industry that let them fade. Heaven Help Us belongs to that second category. At its core, the film is a grounded coming-of-age story set inside a strict Catholic school. It explores discipline, rebellion, friendship, and the quiet emotional struggles of growing up. There are no massive action sequences, no spectacle, just characters navigating a rigid world that shapes who they become. And in 1985, that simplicity became its biggest weakness. Audiences were shifting. The box office was being dominated by larger, faster, more visually striking films. Compared to those, Heaven Help Us felt small, almost invisible. Even though the film offered strong performances and relatable themes, it struggled to gain attention. Marketing couldn't position it as essential viewing, especially when competing against louder, more exciting releases. Without momentum, it quickly slipped out of theaters. Financially, it underperformed, becoming one of the year's most overlooked disappointments. But its failure reveals something deeper. Hollywood was entering a phase where scale began to outweigh subtle storytelling. Films built on quiet emotion and character nuance were becoming harder to sell, no matter how well they were made. Heaven Help Us didn't fail because it lacked quality. It failed because it arrived at the wrong moment, when audiences were no longer looking for what it offered. And sometimes, in Hollywood, timing matters more than everything else. Behind every failed film lies a decision that seemed right at the time. In 1985, those decisions cost studios millions and quietly reshaped Hollywood's future. But the real question is this: how many of today's guaranteed hits are heading toward the same fate? Because history doesn't repeat loudly. It repeats when no one is paying attention.